Well, hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of the Mustard Seed Leadership Podcast. Special shout out today to Connie there in Umkomaas, City Hill Church. He sent me encouragement saying he listens to these regularly and has found it helpful. So if you're a regular listener, why don't you let me know, and we'd love to send out a shout out to you as well. So we are on week 5 of a 7-part series which we've called 7 Most Powerful Characteristics of a Leader, which for me has been looking back on 30 years of leadership journey, trying to narrow it down to those 7 things which I would consider most crucial in terms of characteristics of a leader. And the one we're going to look at today is a big one, and it's courage. Courage. One of the quotes that I often use as a leader, probably because it strikes quite close to home for me, is simply this: leadership is the art of disguising terror. So many people think that leaders are confident, they're up there, they seem so bold. Little do they know that behind the scenes, there's normally so much nervousness, fear that's going on. And that's what I want to speak about today. One of the greatest challenges that holds people back from doing great things is fear. And leaders, we are called to do great things, which means we're going to have to break through those fear barriers. I like the way Craig Groeschel said it. He said the pathway to your greatest breakthrough is straight through your greatest fear. Fear is something we're going to have to get used to as leaders. The only question is how we respond to it. Do we allow fear to control us, or do we step straight through it as we trust that God is with us? Fear is what holds people back. And leaders are called not only to overcome their own fears, but then to help other people overcome theirs. A big part of our leadership is giving people the courage to get over that speed bump of fear so that they can do what God has called them to do. So what I want to do today is just look briefly at 3 great leaders and how they faced the fears that were potentially going to hold them back. Number 1, Moses. When God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he was afraid. And what we see in Moses' life is how he used excuses to justify why he couldn't do something, but in fact the excuses were just masking his fear. And many times that's what happens. We have all of these excuses: I'm too busy, I'm this, I'm that. But if we were dead honest, actually those excuses are simply trying to justify the fear that's holding us back. For example, he felt that having no leadership title was a valid excuse. I can't lead. Who am I? He felt that not knowing God enough was a valid excuse. What do I tell Pharaoh? Who's this God? He felt, thirdly, that his lack of authority or reputation was a valid excuse. Why would the people listen to me? Who am I? He felt that his lack of speaking skill and ability was a valid excuse. I don't have the training. I don't have the skills. He felt that his lack of confidence was a valid excuse. Now, you might resonate with one or more of those excuses. They're real, but they're actually just hiding the fear behind their excuse. God said this in Exodus 4 verses 13 and 14. When Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord, please," said someone else. Then the Lord's anger burnt against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you." It's interesting that God actually became angry with Moses. He thought he was justified, excuse after excuse after excuse. God's anger burned against him because actually God was angry. You are allowing fear to control you rather than bowing your knee and trusting in God. Number 2, let's have a look at Joshua. Joshua took over from Moses and was called to lead the Israelites from the desert into the promised land. They had multiple kings and armies and giants and cities to overcome. But I think the biggest issue for Joshua was probably the fact that he was having to take over after Moses. Moses, this mighty man of God, Moses who performed these signs and wonders, opened up the ocean, and Moses had such a reputation, and now Joshua had to step into that. And I think the problem for Joshua was comparison. He was now going to compare himself to this great leader who'd come before him. Joshua had the faith to face the giants. His fears might have been in comparing himself to Moses, who was such a powerful leader, and seeing the difficulties that lead. If Moses had all those difficulties with the people, what about me? This is what God said, Joshua 1 verse 9, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Notice it's a command. I'm commanding you not to be afraid or discouraged. That means if we're giving into fear, actually, it's a sin. And actually, it's a choice. If God commands us, like he commanded Joshua, not to be discouraged, not to be terrified, then we have a choice, leaders, and we have to repent of that. Fear comes as a temptation. Every leader will experience the temptation of fear. That's normal. But whether you allow the fear to take a hold of you and begin to control you, that's the big issue. Leaders need to be courageous and overcome fear. Lastly then, let's look at Gideon. Gideon, for him, I believe it was his poor sense of self-image or his self-esteem. The way he saw himself was the very excuse when God came to him. He experienced self-pity, a victim mentality that all the hardships the people faced were actually God's fault and not their own. He literally saw himself as the youngest member of the least family of the smallest tribe. Talk about an inferiority complex. Now, what did God say to him? Two things. Judges 6 verse 12. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Notice how God spoke into his identity, because that was what was keeping him in fear and holding him back. And verse number 14, the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Which brings us to the challenge. All leaders will face fears. It's normal. It's how we respond to these fears that determines our effectiveness as a leader. Your excuses, for some, the excuses are used to disguise fear and hold you back. For some, it's comparison and past bad experience. That's the root of your fear. For some, it's low self-esteem, poor identity, or low confidence in God. That's at the root of the fear. It's important that we recognize where these fears come from so that we can learn to overcome. What's even more important is to note how God deals with the fear of a leader. Two quick examples. Remember what he said to Joshua? "Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." In Judges, to Gideon, the Lord answered, "I will be with you." This is God's solution to the fear that we face as leaders. It's the revelation our God is with us. He is Emmanuel, Jesus, God with us. In fact, in Matthew 28, when he gave the Great Commission, remember, go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, and he said, "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." That's why leaders, if we're going to walk in courage and boldness, we need the revelation that God is with us. When the disciples were filled with the Spirit, God with us, they suddenly grew in great boldness and strength. So let me leave you quickly with 3 questions. Number 1, can you identify any excuses that you might be hiding behind trying to legitimize your fears? Number 2, do you ever find comparison to other leaders that leads to fears of inadequacy that hold you back? And number 3, do you struggle with issues of low self-esteem or poor identity that keep you from putting more confidence in God? What is it that's holding you back? Remember, leaders, if we're going to break through, it's going to be straight through our fears. Hope it helps. See you again next week. Until then, may the Lord bless you, and bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Remember, if you'd like the notes that come along with this episode or any one of our past episodes, you can visit outlookchurch.co.za/mustardseed leadership, where you can see all our past episodes, all the resources and notes that go along with this. Until next time, keep growing.